Greetings and welcome to my channel. This is Sorcerer Tal. You can also find me on Facebook in the Sorcerers Guild. Today on Magical Theory, we are going to be talking about the concept of altar servitors. So what is an altar servitor? An altar servitor is best seen as giving your altar kind of a computer or AI-like interface. This makes your altar less of a static object that you cast spells upon and turns it into something reminiscent of a familiar that you cast spells with. The primary function of an altar servitor is to perform routine maintenance on your existing spell work, helping it operate more smoothly by acting as a facilitator to smooth out unforeseen circumstances or obstacles in your working, giving all of your work just a touch of that servitor ability to problem solve. Okay, now I do have a bit of a script I've written for myself this time. If you see me glancing down occasionally, that is what I am doing, is looking at the script that I've written to keep myself on course. I will put it in the description if it fits. If not, I'll put it in the comments in case you'd like to read along. Now, given a proper amount of complexity, you can even train your altar servitor to cast spells on its own. This is going to work best if it is spells that you have cast previously, so that it has a program to follow. Yeah, that's how you program it, is by casting that spell yourself. Then the existing pathway is there in the energies, and you can teach your altar servitor to replicate those spells. If they require ingredients, you would still have to provide those ingredients for the spell to work, for the altar to work with. Just place them on the side of your altar, something like that. I have used several methods over the years to create or restart an existing altar servitor program, and I have found there are a few things that are quite helpful in creating an altar servitor program. One of the ones that is actually the newest to me is an altar sigil, but I have found it to be quite useful, and it will be very useful in restarting an existing program. It helps strengthen and define its form, but it also gives you a means of accessing your spell work remotely through the servitor program. So this is very helpful in your cantrip spells, which I have discussed before. The altar servitor helps facilitate that link, especially if you keep a copy of the sigil on you, and to facilitate that link and make it stronger. I draw this sigil on every object on my altar that is connected to the servitor program. You can also use this sigil to restart an existing altar, as I said, should you have to move or temporarily take down your altar for some other reason. An altar servitor does not require a vessel because the altar itself is the servitor's vessel. However, on top of the sigil, it will also need a power source and a brain to process information. Now, the battery aspect doesn't need to be complex, especially if you work with your altar on a daily basis. If you were doing that simply like putting a crystal on the altar or something to gather the energies from you interacting with the altar and contain them to power the servitor, that will work fine. Myself, I have servitor tanks that I use. I have a few videos on those that I will link to here. They have Daphnia and different creatures in them, and the positive life force generated by those creatures powers the servitor, but also helps in our next part of the process, which is in the next step we are going to talk about, which is the brain or processing unit of the servitor, because it is connected to the collective unconscious of all the minor beings that are existing in those tanks on my altar, and that's what it uses to process information. Okay, so, as I said, it will also need a brain. My first altar servitor, I actually used I used the CPU from an old computer that had broke down. I thought, well, it's a processing center, so I pulled one out of a computer and put it on there, and I mean, it worked, clearly, because I had an altar servitor. I don't know, maybe that proves the processing part isn't all that important. That might have been mostly just symbolic, because I have found since that organic material works much better. Besides the servitor tanks and minions, like my yeast minions, which I have a video on those as well, and they are connected to the servitor program. That's how I interact with the minions. And in that process, they also power the servitor and help it process thoughts as well. I also have some preserved brain matter, skulls, and just various objects that I've placed on the altar to help it process. I mean, I still actually use, there's like some broken phones parts and stuff like that hidden in various parts of the altar that are still connected to the processing thing. So I don't know. You could probably make one in your computer if you wanted to. In fact, that's an interesting idea. One of you programmer people, if you want to connect your computer to your altar and literally like program some kind of servitor application, that would be awesome. If you do, tell us about it in the comments. That would be so cool. Okay. So far, I haven't found any problem with giving it multiple processing units, even though they don't sound compatible, like the preserved brain matter and the pieces of broken phones and such. But I haven't seen any problem with it, like, having an operating language issue or anything like that. It seems to be just fine. Maintenance of the altar is simply to use your altar and give the servitor tasks to perform. My early altars didn't have a sense of self. I have, because I've been working with it so long, slowly allowed it to develop a sense of self. But if you do allow it to develop a sense of self, you want to keep it basic. You don't want it to have things where it could get bored. And if you do feel like it's going to start going that way, think of things it can do while it's bored. But one thing that I want to mention here with giving it a sense of self, at least in my experience, these altar servitors tend to have a strong instinct towards self-preservation. So the altar servitor sigil should help with that, because it makes an obvious way for you to be able to recreate the altar in the event that you have to move the altar into another room or a different side of the room or anything like that. This is a good way of being able to reassure the servitor that it won't be the end of its existence. Or you simply want to make sure to filter that out of the creation so that it doesn't interfere with you trying to move or anything like that. So, as I said, sense of self. And I mean, I see some advantages to it. I've found some advantages to the altar having a sense of self. But you want to keep it basic. And keep in mind that it will develop a sense of self-preservation. Okay, so I think that'll be it for this episode. Thank you once again for joining us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please take the opportunity to do so now. Until then, bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tal.